of the STEAM school. This agreement authorizes the City of Syracuse and the Syracuse City School District to enter in a lease with Onondaga County for the property of 701 South Warren Street. This is for the sole purpose to grant permission to the county to develop an aid in the construction of the STEAM school. This is a 15-year lease with no renewal options. Not to exceed $74 million. However, those amounts, as per our last meeting, Suzanne Slack from the district said may change a little given the time it's taken to be able to process this and how increases, have impacted potential budgets. So to talk about all of that and give us all the details that we may need today, here Suzanne Slack from the Syracuse City School District. And welcome everybody, and thank you for all the counselors that have joined us. Thank you. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Thank you, Counselor. Again, my name is Suzanne Slack. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the school district. What we're looking at is a lease opportunity with Onondaga County, which is not traditional. We have not historically entered into a three-party agreement to lease a building for the purpose of renovation. What the background is that in order to renovate the STEAM school, the district went to the state for state aid, and it would only be about $32 million that they would allow us for the renovation, which is not nearly enough to do all the renovations that would be needed to open that building as a functioning school. So in addition to that, to do this as a traditional project, we would have to go through the city for general obligation bonds to do a renovation because this school is not included in phase 2 JSCB and phase 3 JSCB won't start for several years. So due to the timing of that, we put our heads together and sat down with the county to say, how can we solve these problems? The county offered to do the renovations of the building. They have a better credit rating traditionally than the city and the school district, so they can borrow money at a lower interest rate. They have the capacity in their borrowing limit to do the borrowing for a project of this size. In addition to that, in working with the governor and our local delegates, we were able to negotiate with the state to double the maximum cost allowance or double the building aid that would be allowable on the project if we were to enter into this lease. So that solved a number of problems. Now there's 74 million instead of the original 32 that we had estimated. We have someone with the ability to borrow with a favorable borrowing history. So we think that it would be lower interest going forward. And the project could get done faster than if we were waiting for JCB phase 3. So what this lease document does is it really is the first stepping stone to allow the three of us to enter into a three-party agreement to move forward with this project together. What the lease does is it will allow the city to transition ownership to the county. Then the county will have the ability to borrow and renovate for the building because they have actual ownership of it. When the construction is complete, there will be the normal walkthrough where the city goes in and gives us a certificate of occupancy, but there will also be a state approval of that certificate of occupancy. Once that's granted, which let's say would be in July of a school year, then the lease would be triggered. So the state will not allow the lease to actually go into place until we have occupancy and we can move in and occupy that building. So at that point, which let's say, I'll make up a date, is July of 2025, an actual lease would be entered into with revised rates because you know that construction costs have gone up and so does the state. So they will revise the state aid portion according to new building allowances. So it'll be north of 74 million. We just don't know the exact number yet. We'll enter into that lease, we'll occupy the building. And so for 15 years from that point in time, we will get 1/15 of the state aid amount will come into the school district from the state. We will use that to pay the lease to the county. There will be some local share, like there always is in construction projects, because the state gives us 98 cents on the dollar So that additional local share would come out of the school district's budget for those 15 years. So it may not line up exactly to the debt schedule that the county has. So theoretically, they might borrow money, say in 2023. They might have to make an interest payment in that year and maybe a principal and interest payment the next year. But then starting in 2025, in my example, they would be making debt payments, and those would be offset largely by the state aid payments that we would be making to them for the lease. So this is a very untraditional project, but when it's over, when the lease ends at the end of 15 years, there's no option to extend it because the purpose is only to pay off the debt for the construction. When that lease ends, ownership will transition back to the city, and that will make it how all the other schools operate today. All the school buildings are owned by the city. The school district occupies them, so we are responsible for all the upkeep, the maintenance, and the renovations. And that's what will happen with the Greystone building. It'll come back to the city. The district will run a school in essence in that building, and it will be the normal course of business. So this is an interim period where we would actually have the county involved and have that lease established.
Thank you, Suzanne. Are there any questions from my fellow councilors?
On that piece, but I guess no. Because Suzanne, I heard what you said. You said that it's a three-way partnership, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right. Let me think. I just want to think about this a little bit more because I'm hearing what you're saying about the 15 years, and I'm hearing what you're saying about the county, and I hear what you say about the partnership, and I just don't want to see the city stuck with the brunt of this down the road because I guess we have to think about 15, 20 years from now. I'm not going to be here and neither will you. And I just don't want to go into the escrow and dump it on taxpayers.
Right, right. I understand that. So right now, what happens is for any other debt that's incurred for building renovations, let's say JSCB Phase 2, the city and the district through the JSCB have issued debt, and we're working on the renovations of those buildings. The state reimburses the district for the debt. It doesn't always align time-wise, but we put right into our budget each year the debt schedule. So we're still paying off debt from 20 years ago or 10 years ago. We have all of that built into the budget, and that's part of the budget review process when it comes over to the city. The folks in your budget department will look and make sure that we've properly accounted for the debt that's coming in. It's on us to estimate the state aid, which is a little bit more complicated, but we do build that expense into the budget. And so the same would be true with the lease. There was some provision that Joe Barry mentioned for verifying that we'd put that into our budget each year as well when it comes over to the city.
Okay, so basically, you're telling me that I don't believe the school district will default on this payment, but you're basically saying they won't default because it's going to be added into your budget.
So what I'm saying is that there's a check and balance in place so that if I'm gone and someone replaces me and they don't know about this and it falls off the radar, it is part of that annual review process so that it should be picked up when the city is reviewing the school district budget. Not a guarantee, but
Okay, so
you're
you're putting the onus back on the city again, right?
No, I'm just saying that there is a check and balance. The onus is on the district. It's our responsibility and our obligation, but there are checks and balances in place when we submit our budget to the city. I think you know from the years that you've been on the council that the councilors go through a pretty thorough review of our budget. We give you a brief overview and then answer a myriad of questions. And so I would think when the lease goes into place, that it would be something that's triggering questions from the council as well as the budget review. I don't understand, Counselor, and I apologize, the abstract portion of it. But again, Joe is on the call, maybe to help answer that. And the
Joy,
city, the
oh,
city
go on.
receives our state aid payments. So all of the money that flows from the state comes through the city. It goes through the intercept for the trustee of JSCB and then back to the city. So the city actually receives the state aid on our behalf and then credits our accounts accordingly. So you would have the, not you personally, but your finance department would have the site to see that the state aid is coming in to make sure that we have funding to make that lease payment.
Go ahead, Pat. I see that you have a question.
Yeah, Suzanne, sort of a follow-up to the president's question. So the lease, the county will be responsible for all upkeep, all maintenance and all that, correct?
No, so they will be responsible for the construction.
And
And
we'll be
once that-
responsible for the upkeep and the, all that.
Once
school
we move
district.
in, yes, you are correct. You are
Okay,
correct.
along those lines, are you confident that you'll have revenue streams operationally to maintain this building and keep this building up? And I'm including, you're gonna have to hire obviously more staff, correct, to staff the building as far as teachers go, custodians, support staff and all that.
You are correct. So part of the original proposal for this included a pro forma review. And assumptions will change over time, but essentially we built out what the staffing would look like, what the state aid would look like, and then it does include a tuition component for students attending that are not residents of the city. So for example, a student coming from Liverpool School District to the STEAM High School, their school would pay us a tuition. They wouldn't as a family, but the school would actually pay us a tuition component for that.
So in essence, there's the school aid for that particular student will transfer to the city schools, correct?
I don't want to say yes to that for one reason, Commissioner. Many of the suburbs, most of the aid, most of the funding per pupil is taxes. It's property taxes. Where here it's mostly state aid. So it would be the revenue for that child in some fashion would be turned into a tuition that would be remitted to the district.
Okay, excellent. So what would it cost, or what, just a ballpark figure, what does it cost to run this school? How many teachers you're talking about, custodians, whatever?
You know what, I don't have my pro forma in front of me, Counselor, I'm sorry about that. But we did build it out over time. So the first year, we would enroll ninth grade students. And it would
Okay.
have 250 kids, and then it would roll up after that. So would there be a full-time security guard and custodian? Yes, but maybe a part-time music teacher. So we kind of phased in the staffing according to what the enrollment would be. So it would really take 4 years for that to function as a full 4-year high school.
And obviously the other corresponding thing will be the other schools won't have as many kids. I imagine a lot of the other schools will have kids going to that, the old Central High School, correct?
Right, and I think some of the balancing in the suburbs will be, currently they have students in their buildings or in a BOCES program. I think now they're going to have a third option, so they'll have fewer kids in BOCES, fewer kids in their schools, not hundreds, but fewer, and then the residual would be at the STEAM school.
Okay, so your budget will be larger, obviously, when this
Yes.
gets, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Councilor Paniagua, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I still have another question.
You go
Joe Barry, if you're on this line, let me ask you a question. So just for argument's sake, and say that 74 million has to go on the abstract, how long would that stay on our city abstract? That stays forever, doesn't it?
Yes, Madam President, Joe Barry, First Assistant. So I think, well, to answer your specific question, what would go on the abstract is any of the annual rent that was defaulted. So say, for example, $6 million was due in July of 2026. And for some crazy reason, the school district did not make that payment. What would go on the abstract would be that one missed rental payment. So not the whole 74 million. It's per year. So the initial missed payment would go on, and then unfortunately it could happen again the next year if that continued. But I really think that's an unlikely scenario. This financing mechanism, in my view, is very similar to JSCB, which is what we've been doing since 2006, because it is backed up by the state aid. And the difference here is the county is the financing mechanism, not the industrial development agency. And the industrial development agency did not need a mechanism like the abstract because the JSCB legislation provided for the state aid intercept that Suzanne mentioned. So they have full security.
Right. So how long would that, say, argument's sake, 6 or 12 million stay on the city abstract?
Well, it would be on forever. It would go on as a part of the tax bill, which is about 40 million. So it would add to the abstract is pretty big, but it would become part of that annual county tax bill.
That we then in turn pass on to the taxpayers. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
So what's the percent of probability of that even happening, Joe?
Well, in my view, it would take the state defaulting on their state aid payment, which as a sovereign, they I believe always have the ability to change their obligations. But as we saw, even during COVID, which was kind of a doomsday scenario, they delayed state aid, but ultimately they paid it. So, I think from a state policy point of view, they send, school aid is one of the largest items in the state budget. They fund schools, building all over the state. And once they make a legislative commitment like this, I think it would take something extraordinary for them not to go through with that 74 million.
Nader, I know you have a question. Are you in the line? Go right ahead, Nader.
Thank you. Just some points of clarification, if I may, from the city standpoint. So Suzanne, you mentioned the $74 million. When I was on the council, the estimated cost for that building was anywhere from 52 million to $104 million, I believe. And so we're now talking about $74 million from the state. And I understand the city or the district is putting in another $10 million. And then there's towards construction costs. And then there's in the STEAM Act, there's, as you pointed out last week, there is a kind of, what do they call it, an engineering, value engineering. You come to the point where this is what we want to do for the building, but ultimately, this is the amount of money that we have based on the exponential increased cost of construction that you referenced. So how does that gap get, I guess, what's the right word? How does that the potential gap in cost of construction versus what between the district and the state can provide in this value engineering happen? And I ask that in the context because you just said that ultimately the operating cost is assumed through state aid from student aid from the state for the students. So if we can't offer or if we can't construct this and get past this value engineering to a point where it's going to be attractive for county school kids to come, how do you anticipate balancing all of that?
So if I can rephrase just to make sure I understood, you want to
Sure.
know how we're going to reconcile what the projected expense will be for the renovations versus the funding sources that we've identified today. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for cutting it, making it more brief for me.
No, that just helps me understand. So first of all, our facilities department and the county have had estimates done. You know, architects have drawn up quick sketches. They've done an estimate of what those costs would be. We all know, even me, and I'm not in that field, that's not going to be what the actual cost is. It's going to change, right? We know it's going to go up. The state also knows that. So the state is looking at building aid, and when they do the calculation, it has a building cost allowance factor to it. That number is going up. So they're going to acknowledge the increased cost of construction over the last several years, number one. So that's why I keep saying that 74 million is a placeholder for now. It's going to be more than that. Maybe, you know, I don't know, $7 or $10 million more than that. It's going to be some number larger than that, first of all. Once we move forward and get the architectural design completed, which is going to take, I think, the better part of a year, and get that approved by the state, then a new cost estimate will be done that looks at what is going to happen in the building and what the cost estimate is to build that out currently. And then it will go through a bid process. So once the bids are out, that better determines the actual cost. So we may think something is a $10 million cost, but when the bids come in, we got a favorable bid for 8 million. So all of that takes time to reconcile. You don't know those numbers hard and fast up front. So we are going to continually sharpen the pencil to make sure that the costs that we're going to incur are going to be within the limits that we have. So we have the 74 million, which is fluid. We have the 10 million that the school district set aside in their fund balance. We're also applying for a grant for the Build Back Better grant in conjunction with the county and the city for another $10 million. And then the Community Foundation is opening an investment account for us to receive donations for the STEAM School project, which I think you know the work of Dr. Jody Manning. He has been out working with local industry to garner donations. So once we have that established, we'll have another mechanism for additional funding to come in. So at the end, you have been around for a while as well. I think you know that the city engineering department and the school district facilities department are masters of keeping the scope of a project within what we can afford. So maybe we don't hang blinds on the windows the first year. We have to wait and do that next year. There might be small things that we have to tweak at the end in order to stay within the confines of the budget. But I think, you know, we have a pretty good track record of being able to do that. So we will do our best to have the plans be as elaborate as possible to make that building as beautiful and attractive and educationally sound as possible. But we will do it responsibly within the confines of the budget that we have for the project.
Thank you. And I guess then the issue for me is that you're right, I have been around, not as long as Councilor Hogan, but I've been around for a while. And the reality is that I lived through with you what transpired from the state aid issues and the cutbacks that we faced in 2010, 11, and that timeframe, which were very acute and caused, I think, for the district to lose nearly 1,000 people. I can't remember exactly the number of employees. So my point being is that, so there's some safeguards built in. My understanding when this legislation was first thought of, Assemblyman Magnarelli said 74 million was the tops. There wasn't going to be any more money. So I'm glad to hear now that there's some realization that costs will go up. And so it's all relative, that there'll be this increase from the state. And the idea that there is some review in terms of this value engineering, in terms of equating to what we really want to have, is also good. Then the issue becomes on putting, as Councilor Hudson mentioned, putting this on the abstract, potentially not good public policy, but legal, is probably the only way that this is going to be able to work. Is that correct?
Are you asking Joe?
Joe Barry,
Yes,
I mean, let me rephrase that. In the event that a default was to occur, which we think is highly unlikely, this would be the mechanism for the county to secure its bonds. So from when you say it's the only way it's going to work, I think after our extensive discussions with the county, they would be very reluctant to go forward without some kind of security guarantee like this.
and I appreciate that. I guess my only point is that, to follow up on President Hudson, the abstract is really kind of a mystery to most people. And it's certainly not really publicly understood as to the taxpayer about what that mechanism is. So I appreciate and respect the fact that the counselor asked that question and that you, Joe, are on top of this. I'm sure Jennifer's been involved in as well, making sure that the city taxpayer is fully aware of how this is going to work. It should be something that should be publicly broadcast, in my opinion. And as my role as the auditor, I want to make sure that we do that as transparent as possible to let the taxpayer know that, yes, this is a great idea and that we're doing it, but here's the potential liability to them as city taxpayers. That's my concern.
But I do want to emphasize it will only occur in the event annual rent payment is not made.
I understand that. That's my
We've been
point.
making JACB payments without interruption since 2006. So I think the
Right.
state aid, is as secure as anything can be in life. The cutbacks that you referenced in state aid back in 2010 or so, that was to operating aid, which is really a different pot of money that I'm sure Suzanne can explain. But there's a difference between the operating aid the district gets every state budget and the state building aid, which is more of a long-term commitment.
Yes, but my concern is equally, as you just pointed out, is the issue of, we just went through a pandemic and certain things could happen that that's my only issue, is the transparency of this, that it's just laid out as best as possible to the public so that they're aware of it. I'm not arguing with it philosophically. I'm just saying the transparency is key, as Councilor Hudson, I think, was also articulating.
Well, and that's why we mentioned it in the request letter and the ordinance so that it would be fully disclosed, and why we're having the discussion now.
Yes, thank you.
So
Councilor Navarro.
if I may piggyback on Joe's comment about the state aid, when the lease is approved by the state and we take occupancy of the building, essentially the state is going to borrow the money so they have it available for building aid. So that is a commitment from them for 15 years, where they're saying, we know that you've done this construction, we've approved everything, and we are scheduling out to make those payments to you. Nothing in life is guaranteed, but those have never been withheld in the history of my time here, unless we made, mistakes on small projects in the past. But building aid will flow based on the schedule. Once the state approves it, I think the taxpayers can sigh relief, because there is a 15-year commitment from the state to send those funds to Syracuse to fund that project. As you mentioned, there have been cuts in the past to foundation aid, which are devastating to the operations of the district, but those cuts were never to building aid or lease aid. Not that they couldn't be, but it has not happened in the time that I've been here.
But wasn't there a delay in that a building aid? Wasn't there times when there was a delay in funding?
I'm sorry.
Reimbursement rather, excuse me.
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
Wasn't there at a time from the state a delay in reimbursement funding for building projects?
The state has something called retroactive prospective building aid, which has kind of a convoluted 1-year delay of when those payments are. So you may be referring to that. There also is prior year aid claims as a bucket in the state, where if a school district submitted something incorrect on a building project and then corrected it in subsequent years, that building aid is sitting in a bucket, but the district doesn't have any building aid projects in that category. Others do, but we don't have any in that category.
So
Kudos
would
to
the
Tom
county
for
give
our-
us grace as well, Suzanne? Because you said it's retro, so if it's retro, would the county give us grace?
That shouldn't apply to our lease at all. I was just giving an example of in the past when we have had building aid delays. That would not happen with the lease aid. It's not part of that program. Councilor Paniagua, Tom Farrar from Facilities joined the call and he has his hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, no, I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry I'm late. Former Councilor Maroon's question. We had consultants years ago throwing out a lot of crazy numbers on the costs of the construction. And what happened here about 2 years ago, we had Stiglitz Snyder sit down and do a rough program for the building, you know, what we would put in each room. And we had Stiglitz used a company called Trophy Point that prepared one estimate for it. The county then took that same program and had King and King Architects and Huber Brewer, who's a construction manager, general contractor, and the estimates are almost the exact same on what the construction costs are. Now, there's a difference in when it goes to construction. So right now, costs have gone up, but we've had to look at things like escalation, when the construction is going to occur. But I am confident that there's enough money budgeted now for the project, which is really what's held up this project for over 20 years, is the amount of funding. The next challenge is going to be to construct it. So there's money built into estimates. I'm the last estimate that I looked at was like in around 94 million, but that's everything. That includes the designer, the construction cost. I think you're in the 70s. So, and as Suzanne talked about, that 74 million is going to go up because the way the state does the building aid is basically your building aid units times the construction cost index, and those indexes generally go up. So I do think we have enough money, and we built in enough things for construction as escalation, unknowns, on and on. Again, when two different entities come out with almost the same construction estimate, I think we're pretty solid on the estimates there. The next challenge, I think, after we get through this lease is going to be to get the project, you know, designed and built, and then to get it filled with students.
Thank you, Tom.
And so on Tom's point, I think what's important for the taxpayer to also understand is we have essentially a vacant building in the heart of the city, and the state is willing to give us over $70 million to put into this community to renovate that building. And although it is being built as a school, I think all of us know it will benefit the whole community with that beautiful auditorium, and with kind of revitalizing that area of town. It does tie into the initiatives from the city that the mayor has laid out. So I really think it will be very advantageous to the taxpayer without costing them additional local taxes.
Thank you, Suzanne. Are there any more questions? Tom, you still have your hands raised.
Counselor, I think, and I just want to mention that along the lines of the city auditor and President Hudson, you know, and I'm sure Suzanne and the rest of the school district folks are aware of this, is that, you know, it's incumbent on us as city councilors to ask questions like this, and it in no way implies that we're against the project, but we have to ferret out these details, especially when it comes to the issues that face us with everything that we faced over the last couple of years. So, you know, I don't want to see this building empty, and the idea of having children in this building, it really is a great thing to think about. And, you know, and I know it's a dream of a lot of folks that graduated from there. And in fact, my father was actually part of the symphony that used to play in Lincoln Auditorium. So, but this is part of the job we have to do. And I'm sure you've gone through these meetings before, Suzanne, so you understand this, and Tommy does too. So I commend both of you for putting this plan together. I certainly will vote in the affirmative. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat. Will local contractors be able to bid for the work? I'm sure the MWB will be in compliance. with the project, Tom?
Yeah, this will be a publicly bid project. So, and it's not a JSCB project, so it has to follow WIC's laws. So there'll be multiple prime contracts to bid on, and then it'll have subcontracting requirements. The count, you know, a lot of that's getting worked out with the county because they do it a little different than the city and the school district do. But yes.
Okay. Any more questions? Well, hearing none, thank you everybody for coming to our special meeting, and we'll see everybody at work session in half an hour. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.